happens when a group of strangers becomes trapped on a planet where darkness means certain death? More importantly, who should they trust when their best chance of survival is also the most dangerous man among them? Welcome back to Film Focus. This is Popcorn Reviews, and today we're checking out the cult classic film Pitch Black. Released in 2000 and directed by David Toohey, Pitch Black is a science fiction horror film that introduced audiences to Richard B. Riddick, an escaped convict with extraordinary night vision, a violent reputation, and a moral code that is far more complicated than it first appears. But Pitch Black is not simply a movie about monsters hunting people in the dark. It is a story about fear, sacrifice, redemption, and the uncomfortable truth that appearances do not always reveal who the real monster is. Before exploring the story, it is important to clarify Riddick's literary origin. Riddick did not originate in a book series. He was created for the screenplay written by Jim Wheat, Ken Wheat, and director David Toohey. Author Frank Loria later wrote a pitch black novelization based on that screenplay. The novel expands portions of Riddick's background, but the movie, not the book, was the character's original introduction. Richard B. Riddick is introduced as a convicted murderer being transported to prison by William J. Johns, a bounty hunter pretending to be a respectable lawman. Riddick's most recognizable features are his unusual silver eyes. According to the story he tells, his eyes were surgically altered in prison, allowing him to see clearly in darkness. The modification also makes daylight painful, forcing him to wear dark goggles. Riddick is intelligent, observant, physically powerful, and extremely dangerous. He rarely trusts anyone because most of his life has been shaped by imprisonment, betrayal, and survival. Not a mindless killer, Riddick understands human nature. He notices fear, dishonesty, and weakness before anyone else does. While the other survivors judge him by his criminal record, Riddick quietly studies their behavior. As the story continues, it becomes clear that some of the supposedly respectable characters are capable of greater cowardice than the convicted murderer. The story begins aboard the Hunter Gretzner, a commercial transport ship carrying passengers through deep space. When the ship is struck by micrometeoroids, it begins falling toward an unknown desert planet. Docking pilot Carolyn Fry takes control and attempts an emergency landing. During the descent, Fry considers sacrificing the sleeping passengers by releasing their section of the ship. Doing so could reduce the weight and possibly save her life. Her commanding officer prevents her from completing the act, but the decision reveals something Fry will struggle with throughout the movie. When death comes close, will she protect others or save herself? The ship crash lands, killing most of the people aboard. Among the survivors are Fry, Johns, Riddick, a religious leader known as the Imam, a teenager named Jack, several settlers, and a wealthy merchant named Paris. Riddick escapes during the confusion. Because Johns describes him as a violent murderer, the survivors immediately assume Riddick is their greatest threat. However, Riddick soon realizes something that the others do not. They are not alone. The planet's secret. The planet appears lifeless, but it has three suns.
Three sons?
Meaning that some form of daylight is almost always present. The survivors discover an abandoned settlement and evidence that the people who lived there died suddenly. They also find a small dropship, but it requires power cells from their damaged transport ship. Then they discover the creatures. Beneath the planet's surface lives an enormous population of flying predators. These creatures are extremely sensitive to light, so they remain underground during the day. Unfortunately, the survivors learn that the planet experiences a massive eclipse approximately every 22 years. That eclipse is about to begin. When the suns disappear, the planet is swallowed by total darkness. Thousands of creatures emerge from underground and begin hunting anything alive. Suddenly, Riddick's unusual eyes make him essential. The man everyone feared is now the only person who can guide them through the darkness. Who is the real monster? As the survivors attempt to carry the power cells back to the dropship, their fear begins to expose their true character. Some panic, some abandon the group, others become selfish. Johns, who presented himself as an honorable officer, is revealed to be a drug addicted bounty hunter motivated primarily by the reward for returning Riddick to prison. When Johns realizes that the creatures are attracted to blood, he suggests injuring Jack and leaving the teenager behind as bait. He is willing to sacrifice a child so that he can escape. Riddick appears to consider the proposal, but then turns against Johns. The two men fight, and Riddick leaves Johns to face the creatures alone. The moment is brutal, but it exposes the movie's central irony. Johns has a badge and claims to represent the law, yet he is willing to murder an innocent person to save himself. Riddick is labeled a criminal, but he refuses to sacrifice Jack. The movie asks us to consider whether morality is determined by a person's title or by the decisions that person makes when no one can force them to do what is right. Carolyn Fry experiences the most significant transformation in the story. At the beginning, she nearly sacrifices her passengers to save herself. She is haunted by that decision and fears that, when tested again, she might still choose her own life over everyone else's. Riddick also intends to leave the survivors behind. He reaches the dropship and prepares to escape alone. Fry confronts him and refuses to go unless they return for Jack and the imam. When Riddick challenges her commitment, she admits that she is now willing to die to save them. Her transformation affects him. Riddick returns with Fry to rescue the others. During their final escape, the creatures attack and Riddick is badly injured. Fry could leave him behind, but she turns back and saves him. In doing so, she sacrifices her own life. Riddick is shocked by her death. For perhaps the first time, someone has risked everything for him, not because he was useful, powerful, or innocent, but because his life still had value. Fry's sacrifice awakens something buried inside him. Riddick completes the rescue, taking Jack and the Imam aboard the dropship. Before leaving, he uses the ship's engines to destroy many of the creatures surrounding them. Once they reach space, Jack asks what they should tell the authorities about Riddick. He answers that Riddick died somewhere on the planet. Symbolically, that statement is true. The completely selfish version of Riddick, the man who believed survival was all that mattered, has begun to die. The central moral of Pitch Black is that darkness does not create character, it reveals it. When the eclipse begins, every character is placed under extreme pressure. Their social positions, reputations, and carefully constructed identities become meaningless. Johns is supposed to be a lawman, but he becomes willing to sacrifice a child. Fry believes she may be a coward, but ultimately gives her life for another person. Riddick is known as a monster, yet he protects Jack and the Imam when abandoning them would have been easier. The movie also teaches that redemption is possible through courageous choices. Fry cannot undo what she nearly did during the crash, but she can decide who she will become afterward. Her final sacrifice does not erase her failure. It proves that her failure does not have to define her. The same is true for Riddick. He does not suddenly become a traditional hero. He remains dangerous, violent, and distrustful. But Fry's example demonstrates that survival without humanity is not enough. Sometimes the person everyone fears may possess more honor than the person everyone trusts, and sometimes it takes complete darkness to reveal the light still living inside someone. Pitch Black succeeds because its most frightening creatures are not its only monsters. The film forces its characters and its audience to examine the selfishness, fear, and moral weakness hidden within human beings. Riddick enters the story as a prisoner whom everyone believes they must survive. By the end, he becomes the reason anyone survives at all. That is what makes Riddick such a memorable anti-hero. He does not represent perfect goodness. He represents the possibility that even someone hardened by violence and betrayal can still choose not to abandon what remains of his humanity. For a long time, I felt like this movie was a warning to us to respect and stay close to one another because you never know when there may be something darker that we all would need to fight. Unity should start long before a threat, right? Tell me in the comments if you guys agree. Also, we've started a request line. If there's a movie you'd like to get a review on, please go to the community tab and place your request into the request line. Thank you all so much for your support and for watching. I'll see you all next movie.